Welcome to Future Insurer, our new video interview series on the role of insurance in a transforming business world. My name is Heike Schmitz from DLA Piper. I advise the insurance industry on sustainability and ESG, and I have the pleasure of leading through this interview. Today, Fabienne Grisovan, Zurich's head of ESG legal and corporate law, will share her views on the role of the legal function in embedding ESG in the insurance industry. Fabienne and I already had numerous discussions on this, and her clear vision on the topic never fails to amaze me, which is why I'm very happy to have you in this interview today, Fabienne.
Thank you very much, Heike. Pleasure to be here.
Fabienne, for your introduction, we agreed on the title Head of ESG Legal and Corporate Law. What is your role at Zurich under this title, and how did you come to lead Zurich's ESG-related legal function?
Well, initially the title was just governance and corporate law. So that shows a little bit the more traditional way how to look at the law, to see what corporate law is like, which is the strong foundation that a company needs to have to work legally on a sound way. So basically this is like the house we have. And ESG, that came on top of it. It came like a natural development because we are already, as part of governance and corporate law, responsible for everything that is strategic, the work with investor relations, everything that relates to financial targets. But the world is now moving and the focus is more shifting towards a holistic way. It's ESG is like the world we live in, how we live together in this world. And governance is just what are the rules amongst us. So we're sort of combining two elements here. It's the house we build and how we live in this house together and how we maintain it.
Most people in the insurance industry I speak to come from asset management, risk management, marketing or reporting functions. And I'm still trying to understand more about the contribution that legal topics can bring to building that house for ESG and creating the rooms that a company and a family can live in.
Yes, I guess you as a lawyer often heard the sentence like, well, here is the result, just give legal sign off. And then you're a little bit perceived like the police officer who just creates obstacles and saying, well, does this work or does it not work? If we stick sort of to the house, nobody would ever have the idea to just build up a house and once it's there, you just go to the engineer and ask, are the statics right? And if the statics are not working, then you would build a supporting pillar, a crappy looking pillar that will be there for once and for all. And you're not just quite happy with it. And I think this is how the legal function changes. We're not only the ones checking and calculating and making sure that the house stands in the end and it doesn't fall apart. We should be part of the architecture. We should be part of sort of already from the beginning, understanding what is the purpose, what are we trying to achieve, what is the strategy, and then together with the business, build a solution that works for everybody so that ultimately we have the house that we like to live in and that works from all aspects. And ultimately the best lawyer is the one that contributes to a solution and where eventually you don't have many hiccups and hassles and dust and issues that come up. It just comes in naturally.
I can imagine, having worked inside an insurance company for quite some time in my professional experience, that it is hard sometimes to establish the legal function as you describe it, not only a function that has to sign off what has been designed by someone else, but to make sure that you sit on the table and that legal is also seen as a stakeholder in the internal process. So how do you do this at Zurich? That's a challenge, isn't it?
Yes, of course, it's a challenge, but everything is a challenge, isn't it? Otherwise, the life would not be interesting. I think at the beginning, you need to be very active. You need to really get into the topics, sort of network, figure out what are the interests, what are the directions going to, what are the different interests being there. I think especially in the world of ESG, there are so many aspects that we need to look at. And so far, everything was rather looked at in isolation. And it's the same for the legal function. Initially, you're just a subject matter expert for specific issues. So if you're in capital markets, you just issue capital markets instruments, potentially a sustainable bond. But the overarching role is rather like putting the pieces of the puzzle together, see what is the ultimate goal that we try to strive towards, and then kind of try to fit the pieces of the puzzle together so that they fit, that you have consistency, that it's not like one arm applies one criteria or one strategy or one approach and a different arm a completely different one, and to sort of put it all together. This is also a very big issue or a topic for a big multinational, because we are active in so many jurisdictions, ultimately in about 215 countries, I think. ESG is sort of, the issues around ESG are globally the same, but we're all dealing with local jurisdictions. So there needs to be a common understanding, and also getting the pulse from the countries, what is prevailing there. Insurance is a regulated industry. How can you stay on top of the pulse, what the regulators locally, but also from a group supervision perspective, what their views are and how that fits together, and how we can achieve consistency across that group.
And if all of that comes together, I imagine that the product will convince everyone at Zurich that it makes sense to involve the legal function. I do like that network aspect of saying it's not an insular topic, and it can't be looked at in an insular way. It needs to be connected to the insurance business. It needs to be connected to the countries where you operate. It needs to be connected to stakeholders. And probably that leads me to the next question, to which you might say no. I hope so, because in my discussions on ESG, I've often heard that ESG is a topic that should be left to experts, and that you should have something like an ESG department which will deal with ESG, whatever that means in that context, and contribute that, and then that's fine. You have an organization that is fit for purpose and that can deal with ESG if you have these 10 experts sitting in their department and doing it. Doesn't seem very convincing to me. And potentially from what you said, it doesn't seem very convincing to you either. But, how do you make sure that this interconnectedness is appropriately dealt with in the context of a company?
Well, ESG is, amongst others, also about diversity and inclusion and about collaboration. So that doesn't sound very collaborative. And it also... What is an ESG expert really? Isn't ESG in everything we do? Isn't it everything that the business relates to? And how can we bring this together if this is not a collaborative approach? It's almost like in the old days when maybe lawyers were perceived as being the ones in an ivory tower sitting behind a walnut desk and waiting until they're being consulted on very specific topics. But if we go back to the architecture type of picture where everybody just works together, it's not the work of a single person or one expert. It's how you bring those different views together to exchange views, to challenge each other. To make sure that the know-how is getting passed. It's together we can achieve much more than everybody in isolation. So in that sense, having ESG experts sitting in a corner and wait to be consulted doesn't sound to be very effective.
I'm happy that you agree. It sounded quite scary to me as a vision, but yes, that has been voiced in one of my conversations. So if it's about connectedness, getting different views on the table, integrating that across businesses and functions, it is on the one hand about the internal views and the internal expertise that you need to bring together in a very inclusive way. But on the other hand, it's also the question, whom do you listen to outside your insurance companies? Which are the stakeholders that you need to listen to? And is it just the shareholder and the shareholder value? Potentially not anymore. Which kind of stakeholders do you take into account in your approach to ESG at Zurich?
Well, to look at it quite holistically, what is also challenging with an insurance company is also in terms of stakeholders. It's not only that we have shareholders or we have employees or we have customers, we're also investors ourselves. So we have the asset management arm, and we're at the same time voicing our expectations for issuers, just as we are an issuer ourselves. But looking at Swiss law more generally, I think we are really good placed in this jurisdiction because traditionally, or basically since the inception of Swiss corporate law, the best interest of the company is what the duty of the board of directors lies with. It's not about increasing or maximizing the profit of the shareholders, but it is about preserving the long-term profitable best interest of the company. And if those long-term interests are being taken into account, I think ultimately this is taking into account all the stakeholders that there are. As I said before, ESG is about the world we live in and how we live together and how we behave. And this is just another way of holistic thinking about it. As a global organization, being active in so many countries and overall 55,000 employees, there is also a responsibility that comes with that. And just taking into account ultimately the long-term interest of the company as a whole will also assure that the company can do good, that it can take its responsibility vis-a-vis the employees and vis-a-vis the societies and vis-a-vis the shareholder and the customers and maybe the companies we invest in. So this is a holistic way.
And who would be better suited to have a long-term perspective on their existence than insurance companies like Zurich? Forgive me, I don't know how long Zurich already exists, but I know there must be hundreds of years. And you obviously aim to be around another 100 years to serve your policyholders, to serve your customers. So it is by nature a very long-term approach that insurers are taking with regard to their own business, with regard to their investments. And maybe this is why they're predestined to actually have that very broad, holistic view on this. Coming to time, I think the interview time is up now, but one of the most interesting questions I would like to ask is, with all those tasks and challenges ahead, how would a conversation between the two of us look in 10 or 15 years? Would we still discuss the role of the legal function? Will it have become natural? What do you think will be the most important things on your desk in 15 years?
In 15 years, that's just about half year down the road towards a net zero target, I think. So hopefully it's not going to be the same topics that will preoccupy us, but the world is changing very fast. And I think the most important thing is not to think about what is in 15 years, but to do the best today and be just open to change and agile to embrace whatever is coming. It's hard to predict those days, how it will look like in 10 or 15 years from now.
I totally understand that. Would you have asked me how it looks like today, I wouldn't have guessed all the momentum and traction we have in relation to climate change today, which I think is very exciting. So let's not make any predictions. Let's just have this interview again in 10 or 15 years. And for the time being, I thank you very much for being here as my interview partner and for the many insights you shared with me and with the audience more generally. Thank you very much for being here today. Let's look brightly towards the future.
Indeed. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.